Hey guys, it's Miss Willie. Make sure you have your notes with you and a pen or a pencil so that you can jot questions down on the left-hand side of your notes, but also fill in the blanks that you have. And let's go ahead and start talking about organizing and presenting scientific data. When you do an experiment, you do not want to hand someone a 20-page lab report to show them what you accomplished. They want to be able to see something that's easy to read. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to organize and present that data to someone. One way to present data is in a graph. Now, a graph is a presentation of information or data that is used to detect patterns, and it shows the pattern on the graph so that it makes the data easier to read for the person you're presenting to. That's the whole reason for using graphs, and make sure you know that. The reason we use graphs to present data is so it makes it an easier to read format. There are three types of graphs we're going to discuss today. One is line graph. The second is bar graph, and lastly is circle graph, but it can also be called pie graph. You can use either one of these terms interchangeably. Just make sure you're familiar with both terms, so whichever one is used, like on the end of course test or on my test, you're familiar with it. Now, each graph is used for a different purpose, and so we're going to talk about them individually now. The first one we're going to talk about is a line graph, and this is an example of a line graph. A line graph can have a curved line or a straight line. It does not matter. And a line graph is actually used to show relationship where the dependent variable changes because the independent variable is changing. Now, something that you need to make sure you know is that a line graph shows continuous changes. That's the difference between it and the other two types of graphs. The independent variable is always on the x-axis. Now, for those of you that do not know, this down here is the x-axis. Okay, so it's the one that goes horizontal on the graph. The independent variable is always on the x-axis. And let me go ahead and give you a little hint that you may want to jot in your notes. Time is always independent variable. So if you are ever using time, now this chart does not use time, so it's not on here. But if time is ever one of your variables, it's always the independent variable. It's always on the x-axis. So if you're asked to label a graph and time is one of your variables, make sure that you know to always put it on the x-axis. Now, as you can see, though, you don't have to have time to have a line graph, but if you do have time, it's always the independent variable. The dependent variable is always on the y-axis, and the y-axis is over here. Okay, so it's the one that goes vertically. So the y-axis goes vertical, the x-axis goes horizontal. Now, on your units of measurement when on your graph, like right here we start with 0 at the corner, the units of measurement must be consistent. Do you see how on the x-axis it increases by 2? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. You cannot do 1, 2, 5, 8. You can't have an inconsistent measurement on that. Your lines on your graph must be consistent measurement. Going this way, now they don't have to be the same. On the x-axis they increase by 2. Okay? On the y-axis, let's look at it. On the y-axis, you go from 0 to 1,000. So you're increasing by 1,000. And then you increase by another 1,000 to go to 2,000, then 3,000. As long as they're consistent, it doesn't matter how you label your graph. They just have to be consistent measurements. They have to have the same number in between each section of your graph. Now we're going to look at a bar graph. A bar graph is going to be used to compare values. So if you wanted to show a comparison of data or a comparison of values, you're going to want to use a bar graph. Now, as you can see, this bar graph is in regards to a department store and how much revenue each department in that store made. Now, it doesn't tell us the time period, so I don't know if it's over a year or over a month. But as you can see, electronics had the most revenue in this department store. Now, bar graphs are a better choice than a line graph when you're showing single values for many items. So if you have 3 or 4 different items and you need to show the values for those particular items, you're going to want to use a bar graph instead of a line graph, because a line graph, remember, shows continuous changes. Now let's look at our last graph. It's called the circle graph, and this is an example. This picture is an example for you. Now, or you can call it a pie graph. A pie graph is used when you're displaying data that's parts of a whole. So as you can see, this pie graph is showing you that pie preferences of, and I don't know, we don't know whose pie preferences, but that 30% of the people that took this survey liked pumpkin pie or preferred pumpkin pie. 23% preferred cherry. But do you see how that 30% is just a part of the 100%? So whenever you're trying to show parts of a whole, you're going to want to use a pie graph. They also always display their information in percentages. That's how you know if you're looking at a pie graph or a circle graph, because they're always going to display their information in percentages. Now this is what I'd like you to do. It's time for you to summarize, and so I would like you to write A, B, and C down in your summary section of your notes. And I want you to come up with a word or a phrase that starts with each one of those letters, A, B, and C, that describes what we've talked about today. And if you have any questions, please write them down on the left-hand side of your notes, and we'll talk about them tomorrow. Have a great evening.